Hi, I'm Isabella He from Signal. We are excited today to demo Signal's modern enterprise authorization platform, which delivers just-in-time access. In this demo, I'm going to show you how Signal can integrate with the sign-in flow of identity providers such as Okta. Today, many organizations use single sign-on as a secure entry portal into applications and services. While identity providers are great at verifying a user's identity, and many can also examine a user's static or long-standing attributes, such as group membership, role, and location, they lack the capability to make authorization decisions based on dynamic business justifications. Without data from a company's range of SaaS applications, such as CRM and HRIS services, identity providers lack the data and policy structures needed to make authorization decisions based on dynamic business justification. When these identity providers are then used to authenticate high-value, high-risk sign-in decisions, users are often permitted to access sensitive data with limited restrictions when their long-standing attributes comply with simple policies. One such example of these high-value events are related to the escalation of privilege for break glass events in cloud service providers such as AWS. Take a fictitious company called Wholesale Chips, for instance. Wholesale Chips are a large semiconductor manufacturer, supplying chips to other large organizations. Wholesale Chips uses Okta, an identity provider, to federate their employees' access to AWS, where they store sensitive data, virtual machines, and more. If a user without proper business justification accesses AWS, such data and resources are put at a security risk. Wholesale Chips is a prime example of an organization that can enhance their authorization through Signal. So using Okta's inline hooks, Signal has integrated with Okta to add authorization layers to their sign-in flows for access to AWS. This configuration enables Signal to be involved in the decision-making process for the roles and permissions granted to a user in the process of federation to AWS. So let's examine this scenario. Wholesale Chips has designated a role-based access permission in Okta, specifying that all employees with the role of developer operations are granted full admin access to AWS for use in emergency situations. Alejandro, who is an employee in the DevOps team, is therefore allowed to federate to AWS using Okta. In this example, Alejandro may need to escalate his privileges to solve a problem in AWS. Without Signal, Alejandro is given access to the entire AWS environment, allowing him to access and manipulate sensitive information that may be beyond what he needs to solve the problem, and thus has business justification for. So this is the Okta Apps dashboard for the company Wholesale Chips, which has integrated sign-on to AWS through Okta's single sign-on service. Alejandro is now going to attempt to access AWS. And as you can see, AWS allows Alejandro access to AWS, giving him unfettered access to other data and virtual machines, as well as users, roles, policies, and permissions. But should Alejandro have this heightened level of access in AWS, which allows him to create new users or view sensitive data stored in the cloud, I want to introduce you to the Signal platform, which aims to help organizations answer that question. So here is the Signal dashboard for the company Wholesale Chips, which uses human-readable policies and a dynamic graph directory to enable authorization based on just-in-time business justification. From the Signal dashboard, we have a policy configured for AWS emergency access, 3 applications that are integrated with Signal to perform just-in-time access checks, and 4 data sources. So going into the Policies tab for emergency access to AWS, we can see that DevOps principals can access AWS service provider assets. For this demonstration, this policy is set up to be consistent with the role-based access permissions that Wholesale Chips can configure in Okta, where all employees with the role of DevOps can access sensitive information with elevated privileges. So let's now jump over to the Signal access logs to see how this policy works with access decisions. Signal's logs allow organizations to centrally manage, audit, and report fine-grained authorization decisions across applications and services. The logs display the policy used to evaluate the access decision, identifiers for the user and app tied to the sign-in attempt, and details on Signal's access decision. We can see that when Alejandro was authorized to AWS, as all DevOps employees were allowed access to AWS, he was able to access the entire AWS environment, despite not necessarily having the business justification to do so. And this is where Signal can step in to provide contextualized, just-in-time access decisions. So let's delve deeper into the data sources that are synchronizing data into the Signal dynamic graph to support policy decisions. Similar to numerous organizations, Wholesale Chips makes extensive use of third-party SaaS applications to manage their customer service, employee directory, and human resources. They've integrated their applications as data sources into Signal, syncing Signal's policy decisions with Azure Active Directory, Salesforce, Workday, and ServiceNow CSM, which includes ServiceNow's case management platforms. So now with data from these data sources, we can configure policies in Signal to restrict access to AWS to users with significant business justification. So let's take a look at this policy and go ahead and edit this policy to further restrict this access to ensure that only the right people can get access to AWS at the right time. So beyond restricting access to the AWS asset to users with the role of DevOps, let's also ensure that the users can only access AWS if they have an active emergency case assigned. Let's take a deeper look at what this means. So we can see that we've just restricted access to AWS to users who have been assigned to a ServiceNow case where the entitlement is emergency access, the product is AWS, and the case was updated less than an hour ago. So let's go ahead and save this policy. So now with this new policy configured, Alejandro will need to be assigned to an active ServiceNow case for emergency access to AWS updated within the last hour. Since we've now defined a new policy, let's give signing into AWS through Okta another go. Since Alejandro hasn't been assigned to the relevant ServiceNow case yet, we'd expect that he is denied access to AWS. And as you can see from the permissions denied messages, Signal has successfully configured AWS permissions to deny access for a user who did not have a business justification to sign in. With that, let's come over to ServiceNow and assign Alejandro the case that he needs to access AWS. So we can see that in this case, it's an active case. The product is AWS. The entitlement is emergency access. So all we need to do is assign Alejandro to this case and update it. And we now expect that Alejandro meets the criteria we've defined in our Signal policy for emergency access to AWS. So jumping back over to Okta sign-in dashboard, let's go ahead and give another sign-in attempt. And we can see that Alejandro is now able to access AWS because he has a significant justification to do so. We see no error messages regarding the permissions denied here. Since Alejandro, let's say he has completed everything that he needed to do in AWS. So now he's going to need to close out his case. So let's come back over to ServiceNow. And let's close out Alejandro's case. So since we defined in our Signal policy that Alejandro needed an active ServiceNow case to sign into AWS, we'd expect that we have just denied him access to AWS. So let's verify that by signing into AWS again through Okta. With this case no longer active, as a reminder, we'd expect that Alejandro has now been denied access to AWS. We can see that this was successful and Alejandro has lost his permission to access AWS. So now that we've demonstrated how Signal's authorization solution provides organizations with the ability to restrict access to users with timely business justification, let's go back to Signal to take another look at the access logs. So we can track Alejandro's access decisions, seeing that with the Signal policy requiring an active ServiceNow case, he was denied access when he was not assigned to a ServiceNow case, then allowed access when he was assigned, then denied access once again when the case was closed. So this aligns perfectly with the policy that we've defined in the Signal console, specifying the need for an active assigned case. As I hope that this demo has helped demonstrate, Signal is evolving access management from static role and attribute-based access control to just-in-time contextualized authorization. With Signal's integration with Okta and other identity providers like Ping Federate, it's easy for organizations to augment their authorization policies alongside their identity verification solutions. To learn more about Signal, visit signal.ai.